I really want to be out here where you are, but I'm going to really try to stay in my time and move around and then not really listen to myself and do what I want anyway. You know how that goes. So I just got here, right? I was thinking, I was literally at the mountaintop yesterday because I was in Breckenridge, Colorado, so I've missed what you've all been talking about. I want to thank everybody at the Festival of Faiths for inviting me here. This is my first time. I've been living in Kentucky for about 3.5 years in Lexington, and this is only like my second time in Louisville. Is that the way you're supposed to say it? Yeah, you can tell I'm not from here. So I'm really excited to be here and be part of the conversation. So, wow, I wrote some things. So some thoughts and some stories, and that's kind of where I'm gonna go here, right? So I've been thinking about this question of purpose, and when people ask me, what do I believe in, it gets me really, and the issue of faith, actually, I don't go to church, I'm kind of confused, right? So I'm just gonna be honest with you, right? And actually, but when I get to it, what I believe in and what I have faith in is people. So I have to tell you a little bit about what I do, what I get privileged to do. I tend to go, I'm coming out behind the table now. I tend to go around the country. People ask me, it's often predominantly white groups that do all kinds of environmental work. So I know you've all been talking about the world and the issues and the environment and stuff that we have out there. They want me to come in and talk about race. And full disclosure, I'm black. Diversity, inclusion, power, and privilege, things that are really hard. I don't think we're really good at it, at having a common conversation about what it means. So we talk about sustainability, we talk about protecting a river, we talk about protecting a forest, but really, what about our relationship to each other? For me, we can't do that work unless we get that right. So what does it mean for us to do that? I tell people, you know, yeah, I can have an intellectual conversation with you about this. I can have a professional conversation, but this is personal. It's personal, it's political, it's intimate, and I think it really should be that way for everyone. So I have to go back. I almost forgot I had this in my hand. Okay. Bam. I always have to tell a little bit of my own story as well, right? Kind of to own where I started and how I got here in terms of thinking of purpose and faith. I always tell people that I'm from New York. I've moved around a lot, but I will always be from New York. I usually get a little attitude about it as well when I tell people. But I want to talk about my parents, actually. Rose and Henry, you're seeing their pictures up there. Rose and Henry grew up in Floyd, Virginia, high school education, poor. Like a lot of black people in the 30s and 40s, they moved north. After my dad fought in the Korean War, they decided to move north because they just weren't getting the kind of job opportunities. They weren't getting any opportunities, let me tell you, in the South. There's a lot I can say about that. So my father came to New York and he got 2 job offers. One, he could be a janitor in Syracuse, New York, about 5 hours north of the city. He didn't take that job. The second one was 30 minutes outside of New York City. Very wealthy Jewish family owned a 12-acre estate. You're seeing the pictures there on the screen. And they also owned a lot of real estate within New York City as well. My father took that job. He was the gardener, the chauffeur. My mom was a sometime housekeeper. It was full-time living on that property in that house you see up in the corner. The Tishmans came up on the weekends and holidays. This is and was a very wealthy white neighborhood. Harry Winston has property down the street. Schaefer Beer lived next door. Wingfield Golf Club is around the corner. We were the only family of color in that neighborhood until the 1990s when a Japanese American woman moved in. After a few years, she moved out. So my parents moved there in the late 50s. They tried to have children and they thought they couldn't, so they adopted me. And then what I always like to say is they relaxed and had my first brother, and then they did some more relaxing and had my second brother. Tishmans only came up on weekends and holidays, which meant me and my brothers had run to this place like our own private park. There's a pond, there's a swimming pool, vegetable gardens, fruit trees. It's a gorgeous piece of property. So my sense of non-human nature and my relationship to it was forged. And I was privileged to have that relationship of forging that relationship with nature day in and day out living on this property. But it's complicated because I can also tell you that when I was 9 years old, I went to public school. I was walking home from school. I tell people I'm highly unimpressive with my little afro and my little reading glasses and my little school bag. There was always cops patrolling this area. I got around the corner from the house. A policeman stopped me. He wanted to know where I was going. I gave him the address, 1000 Old White Plains Road. He just looked at me and said, "Oh, do you work there?" And I'm like, dude, I'm 9. Except I don't say that. I just said, no, I live there. And so he let me go, and I remember going home and telling my parents, my father getting really mad and calling the police station, and the police never stopped me and my brothers again. But as an adult, that's complicated for me, because all the clues were there. I was like a little girl, I was 9, I was coming home from school. What was it about the color of my skin that seemed unnatural for me to be there? So my love of the environment, my love of non-human nature was complicated by this idea that maybe I don't really belong. Maybe my family doesn't really belong, right? So let's jump ahead into the 90s. Both the Tishmans, one has died, the other is about to die. My parents have been caring for this land now full-time for almost 40 years, right? To her credit, she said she wanted to try to keep my parents on this land, but she couldn't for many different reasons. The property was worth $3 million. The property taxes were over $125,000 a year. My dad had been making about $20,000 a year. So instead, she had a house built for them back in Virginia, in Leesburg, Virginia, a beautiful house on a half an acre of land. Mrs. Tishman passed away. My parents stayed on. The new owner came on. My parents stayed on until 2003. Now they've been caring for this land for nearly 50 years, full time. They found a family from the Dominican Republic to move in and replace my parents. My parents then moved to their beautiful house in Virginia, and my father in particular proceeded to get incredibly depressed. And he talked about missing that land, missing that place, and wanting to go back there but not being able to do that. They then received a copy of a letter from their neighbors. A conservation land trust had decided to put a conservation easement on this piece of land, which means in perpetuity nothing can be changed. And it talked about all the environmental values of this piece of land, the wildlife, where it sits in the watershed, all the reasons why this land should be protected. At the end of this letter, and I have a copy of it because I carry it around with me, it's about a page and a half long with some really nice pictures, it thanked the new owner for his conservation mindedness. He'd been on it for 3 years. There was nothing in the letter thanking my parents who'd cared for it for 50 years. And that fast, my parents, my family became invisible. This is where it became incredibly personal for me. And I started thinking about the people around this country, particularly African American, but not only African American, who have been erased, who are invisible, who we don't think have anything to offer, who aren't, despite all the challenges that they face day in and day out, are resilient and are coming up with ideas, who have purpose and who respect their life here and fight for their life here. So with that in mind, oh yeah, you know, this is kind of hard, but I'll put this up here just to say to you that for me, it's the complication about our history and our stories. There isn't one narrative. There are many narratives. So while I have John Muir and President Roosevelt there in the middle thinking about national parks and all these wonderful things that they're thinking about, at the same time, native genocide is going on. At the same time, enslaved Africans have recently been freed, but Jim Crow is happening, so they're not allowed to move around. We've been doing this thing for 400, 500 years, demonizing groups of people, shutting out other groups of people who don't look like us, and we're here at this point. A lot of the reasons for me why we're here aren't new, they are old. It is yet another opportunity for us to stop, take responsibility and ownership for it, and figure out how we can reconcile where we are and heal it in order to move forward. I wanted to give a couple of, I call it convergence, that's right, beautiful. So I had started thinking about this idea of radical presence, and Dr. Syed and I were having a conversation earlier about this idea that I don't think anybody wants to be defined by the fact they've been victimized, which doesn't mean to say that it isn't important to acknowledge and be held accountable for victimization. But I was thinking about this in terms of African Americans, and particularly as it relates to nature and the environment. The idea that if you are able to stand strong and still think forwardly, for me that's a type of radical presence. I saw a show in New York City. It was an art show a number of years ago at the Studio Museum in Harlem, and it was African-American artists had come together from the 1960s to now to think about how we tell story and how we create a story of ourself in place. And they called the show Radical Presence, and I decided to sort of borrow that idea to think about Black people who show up over and over again, even if we erase them, even if we make them invisible, who have something to offer, who we are. I think about Ron Finley, who calls himself the guerrilla gardener. You ain't gangsta unless you're planting something. He lives out in LA. He plants on highway medians. He doesn't wait for permission, because if he waited, he may never get it, because a lot of black people in this country have never been given permission, and he does it anyway. I think about Maureen Betch, and I got to meet Maureen. Is amazing. She's known as the beach woman, the beach lady. She grew up in a very wealthy black family off the coast of Jacksonville, Florida on Amelia Island back in the 40s and 50s. Her great-grandfather, A.L. Lewis, was the first man, black or white, to have a life insurance company in Jacksonville, so made a ton of money. But it didn't matter, because if you were black in the 40s and 50s, you couldn't go to the same beach as white people. So you know what he decided to do? He decided to buy a beach. He did. He named it American Beach. It was on Amelia Island. You could be a black janitor or a black judge. You could have a house on the beach. That's the sand dunes behind it. This is where Maureen grew up. She decided to go to Oberlin College. She decided she wanted to be an opera singer. She went to Germany. The point of the story that I want to tell you about her is sometime in the 70s, she became interested in environmental causes. When she came back to the United States, she gave all her wealth away to environmental causes, over $750,000. Her great-grandfather's house that had been bequeathed to her, she gave it away to environmental causes. This woman was living on a chaise lounge on the beach. I said to Maureen, weren't you scared? And Maureen said, no, I had a big stick. Maureen would tell me, because Amelia Island is this beautiful strip of beach between two other beach resorts with a beautiful maritime forest, you had developers, chomping at the bit to build another hotel, another golf course. Maureen would tell me she would go to civic meetings, where you could kind of discuss it if you were part of the public. And Maureen said I would stand in the background like she wouldn't be noticed. That's all of Maureen's dreadlocks long she carries under her arm anyway. She said she'd stand in the back, they'd do the Pledge of Allegiance. I pledge allegiance to the flag, to the United States of America, and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice. And then she'd shout out at the top of her lungs, for all white people who got money, and all. In the end, working with the National Park Service, they helped to protect 8.2 acres of the sand dunes. And right before she passed away, right after Hurricane Katrina hit, she said to me, I am the freest person you will ever meet, because when I gave away the money, I was able to do exactly what it is I needed to do. I wanted to tell you about John Francis, another example of radical presence. If you haven't heard, you got to look up John Francis. John Francis in the 70s lived in Northern California. There was a small oil spill. He got upset by that oil spill. He decided he wasn't going to take any kind of motorized transport. He said that after a week, he was always getting into arguments with friends and family about the fact that he wouldn't get in their car. So he said, well, I'm just not going to talk to them anymore. For the next 22 years, John walked across the United States to raise environmental awareness. He did it for 17 years without talking. He got his Ph.D. at the University of Wisconsin without talking, okay? He said he started talking on Earth Day when he defended his dissertation. So now Exxon Valdez has happened in 1989. He's still only walking and taking non-motorized transport, but he is talking. He's working on a friend's boat in New England. He gets a call from some folks in Washington, D.C. who said, Exxon Valdez, we don't have anybody in this country who'd ever done a dissertation on oil spills except for John Francis. Will you come down and interview for this job so you can help us develop a plan to deal with oil spills? He said, sure, I'll come down. They were like, we'll send you a plane ticket. He said, I don't take a plane. We'll send you a bus ticket. I don't take a bus. We'll send you a train ticket. I don't take a train. How will you get here? I'll ride my bike. How long will that take? A month. They waited. He rode his bike, he interviewed, he got the job. He's one of our really early architects around our oil spill policy. John told me that when he was walking around and not talking, that the folks in National Geographic approached him and wanted to tell a story about him. But a week later, they changed their mind. And John kind of interpreted that as that they didn't want to do a story about a crazy black man who spent 22 years walking across the United States to raise environmental awareness, 17 years without talking. When he decided he was going to publish a book about his experience in the early 2000s, because he had started an organization called Planet Walker. He couldn't find anybody to publish it because we have so many stories about black men spending 22 years walking across the United States to raise environmental awareness, 17 years without talking. And he published it, but then National Geographic came around and saw that and decided, you know what, we'll publish that for you. And he became a National Geographic fellow. Hollywood has brought the rights to that story, which I'm really excited about because, if they get Idris Elba, I'm going to be there. I really mean that. And often when I say that, audience will say, well, Hollywood's going to mess it up. It shouldn't be Hollywood doing the story. I said, it doesn't matter who does the story. When is the last time you've seen a film about a black man spending 22 years to walk across the United States to raise environmental awareness, 17 years without talking? I don't care who makes the movie. It will get people in the seat to see that kind of resilience and radical presence. Thank you. So I know I'm at the end. Ooh, yeah, because I'm gonna explode. I think the last thing that I want to say, this is why I should stay behind the podium. The last thing that I want to say, you all are so kind and gentle, is I was thinking about just because the world may not see them doesn't mean they can't see the beauty of the world. The thing that I always want to impress over and over again, what is common for human beings, I think what's common for myself and other human beings, is wanting to be seen, wanting to be whole, wanting to have a sense of belonging, wanting you to know that it is not about outreaching to me because you think I'm an empty vessel that you can put in new information, that actually I have dreams and I have spirit and I have ideas and I have a lived experience. And that if we come together, it's our differences together that will allow something new to emerge. So because I love Carl Sagan and because Mary Lovin talked about Carl Sagan, I want to end with a short poem that I discovered because of Carl Sagan from his book Contact. And I don't know if you remember that book. I love that book. And in the beginning, it's a short poem written by a young black child who was in 5th grade. This was 1981, PS 153 in Harlem. My heart trembles like a poor leaf. The planets whirl in my dreams. The stars press against my window. I rotate in my sleep. My bed is a warm planet. Thank you.
Carolyn, that's absolutely beautiful. Thank you.
Oh, I made it.
I'm struck so much by belonging in your words and belonging to your story. One can go a whole life long and never really find that capacity to really hold on to and belong and not just grasp, but to discover, to know your own story in a new way. So I'm struck by that. I'm asking you if you can comment on that sense of what new ways of knowing open to a person when you belong to your own story.
I love that. You say that, and that's, oftentimes, particularly, one of the challenges I had within academia and in the social sciences, that there were those who didn't want me to tell my story and didn't want me to ask others. That wasn't the point. We have to take this larger theoretical 30,000-foot view of whatever the topic is. And in terms of the question of belonging, there are so many of us who've never felt like our story has any value, right? So in part, it's twofold for me. I tell my own story to open the door to say that everybody's story has value. So that's for me where we can connect, and nobody can tell you your story is wrong. Nobody, and you can tell it however you feel. I also do it for myself. I'm usually in rooms where I'm the only one who looks like me. And I think, well, how do I bring myself in the room? What is my responsibility to a story? I also tell this story because I'm adopted. For me, my experience of the world has been that we put a lot at stake in blood. And we even joke about people who are not blood related. I don't know who I am related to. When I'm feeling really good and I'm generally a very optimistic person, I'm like, that means I can be related to everybody. What about that? And so there's something about the potential of a story also evolving over time and having a chance to look back at it and things you didn't see before about it. I think I tell that story 1,000 times, but I realize I'm always different each time I tell it, if that makes sense. Does that make sense?
Mm-hmm. And much of this story that I'm hearing too is it's embedded in your person. It's at the center of your personal life, but it moves out into the larger world, the community of life, the Earth community.
I feel like I've been gifted in so many ways, and not the least of which is I have met so many incredible people who have shared their stories with me. I was sitting in the trailer of a Tuskegee Airman telling me his stories of working the land. I've met people I couldn't have imagined I would ever meet. And people who have also said to me, no one's ever asked me to tell my story before. And suddenly I felt empowered, like who am I? But I'm giving them an opportunity. And I don't mean that in any grandiose way, but their generosity of their story also allowed me to sort of take responsibility and ownership of the relationship and holding those stories sacredly together with my own. And that's the other reason I offer my own, because it's, for me, not fair to ask somebody else about their story if I'm not willing to share my own.
Oh, lovely. Giving and holding. Please, colleagues.
Well, you are empowering, and thank you for a beautiful talk, but me to say, actually, my mother was adopted, and I didn't know that until I was already married. And I just learned about 10 days ago that her family is from Kentucky.
Wow.
So I am related to you all.
You got roots.
You got roots.
Yeah, the Dent family from Kentucky. Yeah. So anyway, beautiful, wonderful sense of where we belong. Yeah.
I think oh, go ahead.
Go ahead, please.
Oh, well, what comes up for me, so what my spirit guides have said to me is, look, you guys, you can have this any way you want it. You can have it any way you want it. Do you know that? And right now you're saying you want it like this. So if this isn't really how you want it, then think it over, And so to me, that says that paradigm is a choice. And which is kind of a radical statement, but that's really what's being proposed. Paradigm is a choice. So I feel like really what's upon us right now is what paradigm do we want to choose?
Yes.
I'm going to suggest the paradigm of thriving life. But what that then says is it creates camps about paradigm in a way, and that can happen in family. So, part of your family might be saying, no, we got to stay with the program, and you're crazy if you don't. And I just think this is going to come up. So I just want to put that out there for us to say that, we're going to be being led and called in very different ways and in powerful ways. And people are being led in different directions, possibly. And I just want to offer that support to say that, yes, I see that happening. I'm experiencing that as well. And that's that very powerful thing about the story of family loyalty. Really going to come into play in these next years. And so gentleness all the way around. And I love and support you in whatever that looks like for you.
I think what I really liked about your not only talk, but also your perspective is giving off, and the giving off of yourself. I think we become rich by giving, but not taking. And I think the moment you start sharing your ideas and your thoughts, actually it enriches all of us. And it really raises the tide, so all boats can come up. So the people can actually talk to each other, communicate with each other, and share their personal stories and personal perspective. And I think, in many cases we have kind of often get fearful that I am this pure drop that came from the sky as a pure rain, and then I am part of a nice river, and this river is going to fall into the ocean, and I will lose my identity. But I think if we stayed in that narrative, that paradigm, we isolate ourselves and we become a puddle of water which actually can breed only tadpoles and mosquitoes, right?
Not that they don't have their place.
No, not that there's anything wrong with that either. But I think at the end of the day, we sometimes have to lose that sense of really immediate ownership, and then become part of the ocean that can create really big waves, and that whole life actually comes together. So I think this whole panel discussion has really been very enriching for my personal self. I'm a neuroscientist, I can tell you how a brain cell fires.
Yes.
But I think my whole brain has been on fire because of this thing.
Nice.
It's lovely.